The smell of rain-slicked asphalt and ozone is something I will never forget. It's the smell of the world breaking apart. My name is Vespera Caspian. I'm 32 years old, a senior forensic auditor in Hartford, Connecticut. I spent a decade balancing the books of an empire I wasn't allowed to inherit, only to find my own life being liquidated on the cold asphalt of I-95. For years, I was the one who made sure the taxes were paid, the audits were clean, and the family reputation remained unblemished. I was the architect of their stability, the silent engine in the basement, yet to them, I was merely a convenient utility, until the night I stopped running. It was 2:48 a.m. on a Tuesday. The rain was coming down in gray sheets, the kind that turns the highway into a mirror. I was driving home after a 36-hour audit of a hedge fund in Greenwich. I remember the white glare of headlights crossing the median, the scream of metal as my Honda Civic was forced into the guardrail, and then, a silence so heavy it felt like water. When I regained consciousness, I was pinned. The radiator was hissing, a rhythmic, dying sound. I didn't scream. My training doesn't allow for panic. It demands assessment. I checked my vitals like I check a balance sheet. My breathing was shallow, left lung failing. My pulse was thready. I was a depreciating asset in a totaled car. The paramedics arrived, their blue lights flickering against the raindrops on my windshield like erratic stars. As they cut me out of the wreckage, one of them asked for my emergency contact. I gave him the only name I had been conditioned to believe mattered. Morwenna. In the back of the ambulance, with the siren wailing a mournful staccato, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb was trembling, leaving smears of blood on the glass. I called Morwenna. The phone rang 4 times. "Vespera, why are you calling me at this hour?" Her voice was like expensive silk, smooth, cold, and entirely unbothered. In the background, I heard the sophisticated hum of a jazz quartet and the bright, crystalline clink of champagne flutes. "I was in an accident," I whispered, fighting for every breath. "I'm in an ambulance. I'm going to Hartford Hospital. The doctors, they need a family signature for emergency surgery. I'm bleeding internally." There was a pause. Not a pause of concern, but the heavy silence of a woman calculating an inconvenience. "Vespera, why are you doing this now?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "Phaedra just received her engagement ring. The Sterlings are here. The whole board is here. Don't bring your usual negativity into this room. If you're tired, go home. Don't call again tonight." She hung up. 30 seconds later, my phone vibrated. A notification from the family group chat. A photo appeared. Morwenna, looking radiant in emerald green, standing beside my sister Phaedra, who was holding up a hand adorned with a pear-shaped diamond that cost more than my first 3 years of salary. They were laughing, their faces glowing under the chandeliers of our family estate. The caption, written by Morwenna, read, "Pure happiness when there's no negativity to ruin the moment. Cheers to the golden couple." I stared at the screen. I saw the scene icon under my plea for help. They knew I was bleeding. They knew I was alone. They simply chose to adjust the frame so I was no longer in the picture. A nurse in the ER, a woman named Elena with tired eyes and a kind mouth, saw the phone in my hand. She saw the photo. She didn't say anything, but the way she adjusted my IV was gentler after that. She looked at me with a profound, silent pity. "Do you want me to call someone else?" she asked. "No," I said. My voice was now calm. The anger that had been building up for 30 years was suddenly replaced by a crystal-clear, cold clarity. "I am a court official. I am perfectly sane. I will sign my consent forms myself. Please lock my phone. From now on, if any of them show up, they are intruders." I realized then that I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased. But in the world of auditing, an erasure is just evidence of a crime. While they were prepping me for the ICU, I asked Elena for my tablet. She hesitated, but I told her it was my way of staying calm. I didn't open a game. I opened my banking app. I looked at the recurring transfers I had set up years ago out of a sense of duty I now realized was a delusion. The $4,500 monthly subsidy for Phaedra's loft. Cancelled. The $12,000 quarterly dues for Morwenna's country club. Cancelled. The joint estate tax reserve account that I alone funded to keep our name out of the headlines. Closed. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like setting down a heavy suitcase I had been carrying since I was a child. I realized that my father Caspian was right when he once told me that a bridge is only as strong as its foundation. I had spent my life being their foundation, and they had spent theirs trying to see how much weight they could pile on before I cracked. They thought I was the weak one because I was the one who worked. They thought I was the practical one because I didn't demand the spotlight. They mistook my service for servitude. I've always believed that kindness isn't a weakness, it's a choice. But I also know that even the most resilient heart has a breaking point. I had reached mine on the asphalt of I-95. I was no longer an architect for their comfort. I was now an auditor of their lies. 1 week later, I stood at the threshold of a mahogany-paneled office in Greenwich. My neck was in a brace, my ribs were taped, and my face was a map of yellow and purple bruises. I walked into the room where they were already sitting, sipping espresso and laughing as they prepared to divide the spoils of my father's will. Morwenna looked up, her eyes skimming over my injuries with the same indifference she'd show to a scuff on a shoe. She smirked, a small, triumphant curve of the lips. Beside her, Phaedra was already looking at a catalog for new curtains. They thought I had come to beg for a crumb of the cash they expected to receive. They had no idea I had already closed the vault. "You look terrible, Vespera," Morwenna said, her voice laced with feigned concern. She didn't offer me a seat. She simply handed me a stack of old coffee-stained papers. "Because you like hard work and destruction, your father left you this, the Litchfield house. Take it and ask for nothing more." I took the papers. I didn't argue. I didn't tell them about the letters I'd find or the safe under the floorboards. I just looked at the scars on my hands and remembered the smell of the rain. Now, let me take you back to the autumn of 2018 in Greenwich, Connecticut. The air in our part of the world always smelled of crisp pine and the kind of expensive firewood that didn't dare to smoke. It was a beautiful place to exist, provided you understood that the manicured lawns and the white-columned porches were just the stage for a very specific kind of theater. The incident on I-95 wasn't an isolated stroke of bad luck. It was the inevitable conclusion of a ranking system that had been in place since the day I learned to count. In our house, love wasn't a feeling. It was a high-stakes transaction. My mother, Morwenna, wasn't so much a parent as she was a curator. She didn't raise children. She curated assets for her social portfolio. My father, Caspian, was a man of long silences and hidden safes, watching the room through half-lidded eyes. His presence felt more in the weight of his expectations than in the warmth of his embrace. Then there was Phaedra, my sister. She was 3 years older, the masterpiece of the family. She was fragile as spun glass and twice as sharp. They valued appearance, obedience, and status above all else. In their eyes, Phaedra was the dream they wanted to keep having, while I was the alarm clock that reminded them the bills were due. She was ethereal, a girl of moods and delicate sensibilities who was celebrated just for occupying space. I was the practical one. I was the girl who checked the fuses and balanced the checkbook before I was even out of high school. She was celebrated. I was managed. I remember my college graduation. I had worked 3 jobs to keep my debt low, graduating at the top of my class with a degree in finance. I stood on that stage, looking for my mother's face in the crowd. I found it, but only for a moment. Morwenna left 15 minutes before I walked across the stage because Phaedra had called in a wardrobe crisis for a gala happening that evening. I stood in the parking lot alone afterward, clutching my diploma in the humid June air. My phone buzzed. A text from Morwenna. "Take a taxi. We have the Sterlings for dinner tonight. Don't be late. I need you to finalize the seating chart and check the wine inventory." I didn't argue. I didn't even cry. I just hailed a cab and started working on the seating chart in the back seat. I told myself it made sense. Phaedra was delicate. She needed the cushion of mother's attention. I was built of granite. I could handle the cold. A few years later, I landed my first senior role at the audit firm. It was a massive leap for someone my age. At Sunday brunch, I waited for a lull in the conversation about Phaedra's recent trip to the Amalfi Coast to share my news. "I got the senior auditor position," I said, my voice quiet but clear. Phaedra didn't even look up from her avocado toast. "Mom, I think I'm developing a gluten sensitivity, she interrupted. The bread at that cafe in Positano made me so bloated. The next 45 minutes were spent discussing her digestive health and the merits of ancient grains. No one asked me for my new job title or my salary. They didn't need to. To them, my success was just a guarantee that the family machine would keep running smoothly. There was a time when Morwenna made a catastrophic error in a real estate filing for one of the family's shell companies. It could have triggered a federal audit and a massive lawsuit. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, drinking cold coffee and combing through years of digital ledgers to find the loophole that would fix it. I filed the amended paperwork myself, under her name, saving the estate millions. When I told her it was settled, Morwenna didn't thank me. She didn't even look away from her vanity mirror as she applied her lipstick. "That's what you're for, Vespera," she said, her reflection meeting mine. "You're the one who fixes things. Now go see why the espresso machine is acting up." It made a strange noise this morning. I swallowed the lump in my throat and went to fix the espresso machine. I justified it by telling myself that a lighthouse doesn't seek a thank you from the ships it saves. It just keeps the rocks at bay. I was the lighthouse. I could handle the isolation. I didn't realize that even granite cracks when the frost gets deep enough. Which brings us back to that mahogany office in Greenwich, 1 week after my car was crushed. Morwenna stood up, her silk dress rustling like a warning. She didn't look at the neck brace I was wearing or the way I had to brace myself against the table to stand. She shoved those coffee-stained deeds toward me with a flick of her manicured fingers. "Take the ruined house, Vespera," she said, her voice dropping to that familiar, icy register. "It's as sturdy and joyless as you are. Consider it a fair trade for the trouble you've caused. Don't ask for more." Beside her, Phaedra leaned back in her chair, twisting a massive pear-shaped diamond ring on her finger. The light caught the facets, throwing jagged rainbows against the wall. She smirked at me, the look of a victor watching a peasant gather scraps. I looked at that ring. I recognized the cut. I knew the jeweler. And because I was the forensic auditor who had managed the estate's tax reserves, I knew exactly which account that money had come from. The ring on her finger had been purchased with the funds I had specifically set aside for the estate's property taxes. Taxes that were now 6 months overdue. I took the deeds. I didn't say a word. Morwenna thought she was dumping her trash on me to save herself from the burden of a condemned property. She didn't know that favoritism has a price, and in my world, every debt eventually comes due. It's 3 a.m. in the Litchfield house. The air is thick with the scent of undisturbed dust and the sharp, metallic tang of old hardware. I sit on the floor, my flashlight beam cutting a lonely path through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny ghosts. This house was meant to be my exile, a pile of rotting timber and broken glass intended to humble me. But as an auditor, I know that ruins often hide the most resilient foundations. The incident on I-95 wasn't the start of the rift. It was merely the tipping point that led to the complete collapse. The manipulation began 18 months earlier, in what I now call the temperature shift. After years of cold treatment, Morwenna's voice suddenly became sweet. Sunday lunches in Greenwich were no longer the scene of Phaedra's triumphs. Suddenly there was a place reserved for me. She started asking questions. Small, seemingly domestic questions. "How is that senior auditor position, Vespera? I heard the year-end bonuses in forensic accounting are quite substantial. You've always been so stable." She remembered the names of my clients. She remembered my promotion dates. At the time, I was so hungry to be seen that I mistook her reconnaissance for affection. I told her everything. My savings goals, my overhead, the exact contents of my rainy day fund. I thought I was building a bridge to my mother. I didn't realize I was just providing her with a catalog of my assets. The first ask arrived on a rain-blurred Tuesday. Phaedra had accidentally overextended on a luxury lease for a loft in Soho. Morwenna called, her voice trembling with a performative stress that I now recognize as a calculated pitch. "Phaedra is so distraught, Vespera. She's so young and impulsive, she didn't read the fine print on the security deposit. It's $12,000. Caspian is being so difficult about the liquid accounts this month. Could you help her? Just this once? We'll have it back to you by the 1st. I remember the haptic vibration of my phone as I opened my banking app. I felt a strange, fleeting high as I clicked send. For the first time, I wasn't just the practical one. I was the lifesaver. Morwena's text followed almost instantly. "You're an angel, Vespera. We don't know what we'd do without your strength." But just this once is a lie that parasites tell to keep the host quiet. Within months, the one-time gift evolved into a recurring obligation. It became a quiet, automatic erosion. Phaedra's HOA fees became my monthly responsibility. Morwena's emergency dental work, not covered by her premium insurance, was billed to my card. I became a silent ATM, a ghost in their ledger. When my own car needed a new transmission 6 months ago, the family group chat was a desert. I sat in the dealership lobby, paying the bill with a credit card because my liquid savings had been drained to fund Phaedra's trip to Tulum. I started keeping a spreadsheet. Habit is a hard thing to break for an auditor. I titled it Litchfield Maintenance. A private joke, because I was maintaining a family that was already condemned. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, recipient. Column D, reason, usually marked as emergency. I look at the final tally on my screen now. $142,400. That is the price I paid for a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. I remember a conversation with my father, Caspian, shortly before he died. He watched me as I spent my Saturday morning filing his tax returns while Phaedra was out riding horses. He patted my hand, his skin like parchment. "You're the strong one, Vespera," he whispered. "You don't need the support the others do. You have the granite in you." At the time, I took it as the highest compliment. Now, I see it for what it was. A life sentence of servitude. He was telling me I was a beast of burden, and beasts don't need to be loved. They only need to be steered. The flashlight in my hand flickers. My foot catches on a loose floorboard near the hearth. As an auditor, I'm trained to notice when things don't align. The wood is mismatched, a fraction of an inch higher than the rest. I find a heavy screwdriver in my bag and pry at the edge. The wood moans, the rusty nails giving way with a screech that echoes through the empty hallway. There, nestled in the dust, is a heavy floor safe. It's industrial, the kind that survives fires and floods. Taped to the top is an envelope. My name is written on it in Caspian's blocky masculine script. My hands are cold as I open it. Inside is a single index card. For you, the only one who actually looked. You are always the architect, Vespera. They only know how to live in the houses you build. Trust no one, not even your own heart when it wants to forgive them. The codes are the date your mother actually died. I crouched down, the crumpled piece of paper in my hand. My mother. Not Morwena, who always maintained a facade, but my real mother, the one they never mentioned. My father didn't leave me a pile of rubble. He left me a treasure. I had spent years handing them the keys to my life, dollar by dollar, hoping to buy a love that was never for sale. I didn't know it yet, but the house they thought was my grave was actually my vault. The reckoning was finally coming. March 12, 2025. 2:48 a.m. Hartford, Connecticut. That is the exact moment the internal clock of my life stopped ticking for my family. I was driving home on the I-95 after a 36-hour audit cycle. The rain was an unrelenting gray curtain. I remember the sensation of the tires losing their connection to the world, a terrifying, frictionless glide. Then came the roar. The screech of metal against the concrete median was high-pitched, like a scream that wouldn't end. The impact was a blunt, massive force that pushed the air out of my lungs. My Honda Civic crumpled around me, a cage of steel and shattered safety glass. I remember the smell first. Ozone and the scorched scent of the airbag deployment. Then the taste. The unmistakable copper tang of blood. The dashboard was dead, but the emergency hazard lights were clicking. A slow, rhythmic heartbeat in the dark. Tick, tick, tick. When I woke up in the back of the ambulance, the world was a blur of red and blue strobes reflecting off the rain on the windows. The paramedic, a man with steady hands and a voice that felt like an anchor, leaned over me. "We're going to Hartford Hospital, Miss Caspian. I need an emergency contact, someone who can sign for you if things get complicated." "Morwena," I whispered. My throat felt like it was filled with glass. "She's my mother." Even then, pinned to a backboard with a cervical collar biting into my jaw, I still believed the word mother carried a legal and moral weight that couldn't be ignored. The intake room at the hospital was a sterile, blinding white. The air smelled of industrial bleach and the sharp, biting scent of rubbing alcohol. A surgeon, a man named Dr. Kincaid with eyes like flint, stood over my gurney. He didn't waste time on platitudes. "We have 45 minutes, Miss Caspian," he said, checking a silver watch on his wrist. "You have a grade 3 splenic rupture. We need to clear the internal bleeding. If we wait, you go into hypovolemic shock. I need a family member to authorize the procedure or a designated proxy. We've tried the numbers you gave. No one is answering." I reached for my phone, which the nurse had placed in a plastic bag on my lap. My fingers were cold, my knuckles bruised. I opened the family group chat. I didn't ask for love. I didn't ask for a miracle. I asked for a signature. "I was in a major accident. Hartford Hospital ER. Splenic rupture. I need a family member here to sign for emergency surgery. Please come. It's urgent." I watched the screen. 3 minutes passed. The scene icon appeared under the message. Morwenna had read it. Phaedra had read it. The reply didn't come in words at first. A notification pinged. It was a photo Phaedra had just posted to the group. She was standing at the gala, her arm draped through Morwenna's. They were both holding crystal flutes, the bubbles in the champagne catching the light of the ballroom chandeliers. Phaedra was laughing, showing off the diamond that my audit bonuses had inadvertently helped pay for. Then Morwenna's text appeared. "Vespera, stop being so dramatic. We are in the middle of the toast for Phaedra's engagement. You always choose the most inconvenient times to seek attention. If you're truly hurt, call an Uber and have them bring you home. Don't ruin this night for your sister." The scene receipt sat there, a silent witness to my liquidation. The intake nurse, Sarah, was standing right beside me, holding the clipboard for the ER intake form. She saw the screen. She saw the photo of the champagne flutes and the emoji. She saw my mother tell a daughter with internal bleeding to call a rideshare service. Sarah didn't look away. Her jaw tightened, a hard line of professional fury. "I saw it," Sarah whispered. She looked at Dr. Kincaid, then back at me. "I'll witness your self-consent, Miss Caspian. You are lucid. You are an adult. You don't need them." I didn't cry. Crying requires a belief that someone will care enough to listen. Instead, I felt a cold, surgical resolve. I took the pen. My hand was steady as I signed my own life back into existence. I signed the ER intake form and the surgical authorization. I told Sarah to note the timestamp, 3:15 a.m. "Note the police report number as well," I said, my voice barely a rasp. "Case 25-0982, and make sure the insurance claim reflects that no family members were available for notification." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I opened my banking app one last time. I didn't cancel their accounts yet. That was for later. For now, I just watched the silence. I spent 5 days in that hospital. Strangers brought me water. Strangers changed my bandages. A private medical advocate I hired with my own money sat in the chair where my mother should have been. When I was discharged, I didn't call for a ride from the Greenwich mansion. I hired a private car service to take me to the ruined house in Litchfield. "Triple the rate," I told the driver as he helped me into the back seat. "I'm in a hurry to start my life." It was the cheapest price I had ever paid for my dignity. I am sitting in the Litchfield house now, looking at the spreadsheet of their debts. I realized that while I was lying in that ER, fighting for air, they were using my remote access codes to approve another margin call for Phaedra's wedding fund. They didn't see a daughter in pain. They saw an automated clearinghouse that they assumed would never stop paying. I finally understand the architecture of this family. I wasn't a child to be loved. I was an insurance policy they thought would never expire. Strangers showed up. My family didn't. In that hospital bed, I realized I was convenient, not loved. And as any good auditor will tell you, when an asset becomes a liability, you don't negotiate. You liquidate. The air in the Litchfield house has changed. It no longer smells solely of decay and neglect. Now, it carries the sharp, medicinal scent of the antiseptic on my bandages fighting the warm, earthy aroma of cedar oil. I've spent the last 48 hours cleaning, one bruised rib at a time. Every movement is a reminder of the impact, a physical ledger of a debt I no longer intend to pay. I record the blue-yellow blooming of the hematomas on my side not with self-pity, but with the clinical detachment of a photographer documenting a crime scene. I am sitting on a moth-eaten armchair I've draped in a clean sheet. The hospital called it recovery. I call it a realignment. As an auditor, I know that a company in crisis has two options: crumble or climb, keep paying, or stop bleeding. The pivot happened at 4:12 a.m., while the moonlight was tracing silver lines through the cracked window panes. I reached for my phone, not to check the group chat, which remained a stagnant pool of gala photos and celebratory emojis, but to open my banking app. In the dark room, the blue glow of the screen felt like the only honest thing left in the world. Those recurring transfers were staring back at me. For 6 years, they had been the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of my life, a digital umbilical cord that allowed my family to breathe while I suffocated. I looked at the line items. I saw them for what they were, an inventory of my own exploitation. I didn't feel angry. Anger is a volatile asset. It burns out too quickly. I felt a cold, crystalline focus. I began the checklist. Cancel Phaedra's Soho Loft subsidy, $4,500. Cancel Morwena's Greenwich Country Club quarterly dues, $12,000. Freeze the joint Caspian estate tax reserve account. Security enable two-factor authentication on every private server I've maintained for the firm. Authority revoke the remote access codes for the Greenwich Mansion's security system. The last one was a silent strike. I had designed that system myself. By changing the encryption, I hadn't just locked a door. I had reclaimed the perimeter of my own life. There was no dramatic music, no tears. It felt like setting down a suitcase I had been carrying for 15 years. The silence of the room didn't hurt. It healed. It was the sound of a parasite losing its grip. I returned to the floor safe I had pried open the night before. Beneath the heavy ledgers and the index card from Caspian, I found a bundle wrapped in faded violet silk. It was a collection of letters. They weren't from my father. They were from my biological mother, the woman Morwena had spent 2 decades trying to erase from the Caspian narrative. I read them by the light of my laptop. They weren't just expressions of love, they were legal anchors. My mother had been the true source of the family's initial land holdings. Litchfield wasn't a tax write-off Caspian bought for Morwena. It was my mother's dowry, willed directly to me in a private trust that Morwena had suppressed for 20 years to keep me under her thumb. The deeds I held weren't a consolation prize. They were a confession. I finally stopped negotiating with people who don't love me. I started auditing them instead. The work began. I set up a mobile workstation, 3 monitors, a satellite uplink, and the forensic software that had made me the top auditor at my firm. I began a deep dive into the margin call trap I'd discovered. Morwena and Phaedra had been playing a dangerous game with the estate's liquidity, assuming I would always be there to balance the scales. They had built a mountain of debt on a foundation they thought was a servant. Around noon, Ione Vance arrived. She didn't knock. She just pushed open the door, carrying a thermos of black coffee and a heavy-duty laptop battery. Ione was my mentor, the woman who had taught me that a ledger never lies, but people always do. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't look at my bandages with pity. She stood over my monitors, her eyes scanning the data streams. They'll notice the money before they notice the person, Vespera, Ione said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. They think you're a ghost. Make sure you're a haunt they can't ignore. Be ready. I am ready, Ione, I said, my voice as steady as the numbers on the screen. I've been building their empire for 10 years. Now I'm going to show them what happens when the architect leaves the building. The afternoon faded into a bruised purple dusk. I watched the clock. 10 p.m. In Greenwich, the first of the Soho rent checks would be bouncing. The margin calls would be hitting Morwena's private inbox. The ATM was officially out of service. The fallout came faster than I anticipated. At 11:15 p.m., the silence of the Litchfield woods was shattered by the rhythmic pulsing of blue and red lights. Two police cruisers and a private ambulance rumbled up the overgrown driveway, their tires crunching over the gravel I had spent the morning raking. I watched through the security monitors I'd just reconnected. Morwenna stepped out of the lead car. She wasn't wearing gala silk tonight. She was draped in a concerned mother trench coat, her face a carefully practiced mask of grief for the benefit of the officers. A megaphone barked, the sound distorted and ugly. "Vespera Caspian, this is Deputy Miller. Your mother is here. She's filed an emergency petition. She's concerned that the accident has left you in a state of diminished capacity. Open the door so the medical team can evaluate you." It was the medical ambush I had foreshadowed in my own mind. They weren't here to help. They were here to declare me incompetent so they could seize the house, the safe, and the voting rights Caspian had hidden within these walls. I wasn't terrified. I didn't scream or cry. I stood in the middle of my ruined living room, surrounded by letters from the mother they had tried to kill and evidence of the crimes they had committed. I looked at the screen, at Morwenna's desperate, greedy eyes. I knew the fallout was coming, but Morwenna had made a fatal calculation. She thought she had sent me to a grave. She didn't realize she had actually given me a fortress. The Litchfield house breathes differently now. By 6 a.m., the kitchen smells of French press coffee and the faint, sweet scent of newly sanded cedar wood. I have reclaimed the air. Yet the trauma remains a physical measurement. Despite the peace, there is a dull, rhythmic pressure between my third and fourth ribs, a reminder of the steering column's impact. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a series of conditioned reflexes. I found myself reaching for a third plate while setting the morning table, my hand hovering in the air for 4 seconds before I realized I was still trying to feed a family that had left me for dead on I-95. I put the plate back. The click of ceramic on the counter felt like a victory. My phone vibrated at 2:15 p.m. It was Ione Vance. "Vespera, the news about the incompetency hearing just hit the local court docket." Ione's voice was a low, urgent rasp. "Morwenna isn't coming for a chat. She's bringing the theater. She has 2 private physicians and a court-appointed deputy on her payroll. ETA, tonight." "I'm ready, Ione," I said. "The perimeter is set." The contrast between the internal calm and the external storm became absolute at 3:07 a.m. Through the security monitors I had reinstalled, I watched the blue and red strobes fracture the darkness of the Litchfield pines. The private ambulance and 2 police cruisers rumbled up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the mist like predatory eyes. Morwenna stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was draped in a charcoal trench coat, her face a mask of practiced maternal grief. She began pounding on the oak door. "Vespera, honey, open the door. We just want to help you. The doctors say the accident caused a dissociative break. You aren't yourself," the megaphone from the deputy barked, shattering the silence of the woods. "Miss Caspian, open the door for a wellness check. We have a signed emergency evaluation order." I didn't answer. I didn't yell. I looked at my watch. 3 minutes of yelling. 4 minutes of threats. Then, the texture of the night shifted. 3 sharp, rhythmic knocks echoed through the house. These weren't Morwenna's frantic strikes. They were the authoritative, heavy sounds of a man who owned the ground he stood on. Thud. 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 I walked to the foyer and looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch, his charcoal overcoat damp with rain, was Balthazar Blackwood. Behind him sat a black government sedan with the official seal of the Superior Court. Balthazar wasn't just a lawyer. He was the executor my father had kept in the shadows for a decade. I opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of pine and wet stone. Balthazar stepped into the hallway, his presence immediately deoxygenating Morwenna's drama. He looked past me at my mother, who stood frozen on the lawn, her concerned expression curdling into confusion. "You're making a great deal of noise for someone standing on a landmine, Morwenna," Balthazar said. His voice was low frequency, vibrating with legal finality. Morwenna stepped onto the porch, her heels clicking aggressively. "Balthazar, what are you doing here? This is a private medical matter. My daughter is—" "Your daughter is the owner of this property," Balthazar interrupted. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy, blue-backed legal folder. "Proof object #4. On the cover, embossed in gold foil, were the words, Caspian Litchfield Living Trust. Article 9. Voting control. He didn't look at the doctors or the deputy. He looked directly at Morwenna. According to the terms set by Caspian 8 years ago, the Litchfield deeds are not merely a real estate holding. Balthazar read, his eyes like flint behind his glasses. This property is the legal holding entity for 51% of the Caspian Group's voting stock. Under Article 9, any attempt by a spouse to declare the property owner mentally incompetent triggers an immediate and irrevocable forfeiture of all administrative roles within the corporation. The kinetic collapse of Morwenna's face was total. Her hand flew to her throat, her knuckles turning the color of ash. She realized that by trying to put me in an asylum to steal the house, she had effectively fired herself from the empire she had spent 20 years trying to curate. A 5-second silence fell over the porch, a silence I had waited a lifetime to measure. I stood perfectly still. The blue strobe lights from the police cruisers caught the silver of the forensic auditor badge clipped to my belt. Morwenna's eyes darted from the badge to the blue-backed document, and finally to my face. She saw Vespera Caspian for the first time. Not the practical utility, not the stable disappointment, but the woman who held the keys to the vault. "Facts don't need to shout, Morwenna," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the hum of the ambulance engine. "They just need to be read in the right light. Now tell the paramedics to leave. You have a board meeting to be excluded from." Balthazar gave a single sharp nod. The shift was complete. The ruined house was no longer my exile. It was the seat of the throne. "At the gala on Monday," Balthazar added, "the facts will speak for themselves." My office in the Litchfield house is no longer a dark room. It's the center of all forensic activity. The high-speed printer I had delivered yesterday is running continuously, churning out warm pages of bank statements, encrypted email sequences, and real estate records. I've spent my life quantifying the value of others. Tonight, I'm quantifying the price of self-destruction. There is a specific weight to a black leather binder when it is filled with the truth. I spent hours organizing the tabs. Tab 1, the I-95 call log, documenting the scene receipt at 3 a.m., while I was bleeding in an ambulance. Tab 2, the stolen letters, mother's original dowry willed to me 20 years ago. Tab 3, the ledger of utility, a chronological list of the $142,400 I had paid into Morwenna and Phaedra's personal accounts under the guise of family duty. Tab 4, the margin call trap, the evidence of Morwenna leveraging Caspian's voting stock into a high-risk hedge fund that was currently hemorrhaging. The binder felt hot against my fingertips, the ink barely dry. I wasn't preparing this to win an argument. I was preparing it to prevent the distortion of my existence. In Greenwich, feelings are manipulated, but facts are immutable. Ione Vance leaned against the doorframe, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. She watched me snap the rings of the binder shut. It sounded like a bolt-action rifle being readied. $142,400, Ione said, her voice a low sandpaper rasp. "That's the entry fee you paid to be treated like a nuisance. Don't go there to ask for an apology, Vespera. People like Morwenna don't apologize. They only recalibrate their lies. Go there to be the witness." I adjusted the silk scarf around my neck, carefully concealing the edge of my neck brace. "I'm not bringing a knife to a gunfight, Ione. I'm bringing a mirror. If they don't like what they see, that's a matter of optics, not audit." My phone vibrated on the desk. A text from my cousin, Danny. "Be careful. Morwenna is already in the ballroom. She's telling everyone you had a dissociative breakdown after the accident. She's using words like erratic, confused, and tragically unstable. The narrative is set before you even pull into the driveway." I didn't reply. I just slid the phone into my clutch and picked up the binder. The Caspian estate in Greenwich was a fortress of limestone and light. As my car service pulled up the long gravel drive, I watched the string quartet through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The smell of expensive lilies and aged scotch drifted through the foyer as I stepped inside. It was an arena of champagne and social judgment. The room went quiet in stages. First, the investors near the bar, then the socialites by the piano. I felt the collective weight of 30 pairs of eyes, the pitying tilts of heads, the whispers behind gloved hands. I wasn't a guest. I was a curiosity. Morwenna glided toward me, her emerald silk dress rustling like a snake in tall grass. She wore a smile that was perfectly curated for an audience of concerned peers. "Vespera, darling," she said, her voice loud enough to carry to the Sterlings in the front row. "We were so worried. You shouldn't be out of bed. Is your head feeling clearer tonight? We have the medical team on standby if you feel another episode coming on." She reached for my arm, a gesture meant to look like support but felt like a restraint. I stepped back, the movement sharp and deliberate. "Good evening, Mrs. Caspian," I said. The use of her formal title was a boundary that made the air in the room turn brittle. "I am here for the board announcement. I believe my presence is required by Article 9 of the Living Trust." Morwenna's smile didn't slip, but her eyes darkened. She turned to a group of investors, her hand fluttering toward her heart. The trauma, it's made her so defensive. She's developed this obsession with the old ruined house Caspian bought as a tax write-off. We're having it cleared tonight. Demolished for her own safety, really. We want to remove any reminders of her unstable period. Just then, my phone pinged with a high-priority alert from the Litchfield security system. I pulled it out. On the small screen, a live thermal feed showed a yellow bulldozer rumbling up my driveway, its massive blade lowered toward the porch where my mother's letters were stored. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply walked to the building's giant media screen, the one used for company presentations, and connected my phone via the wireless connection I'd had installed years ago. The room gasped as the live feed of the Litchfield demolition in progress replaced the Caspian Group logo. The high-resolution image showed Morwenna's hired contractors moving toward a house that Balthazar had just declared the legal center of the corporation. The guests saw the brute force. They saw the safety clearance for what it was. The destruction of evidence. Balthazar Blackwood stood up from the front row. He didn't say a word. He just caught my eye and gave a single sharp nod. The chorus was ready. Phaedra, beaming and desperate to reclaim the spotlight, scrambled onto the small stage and grabbed the microphone. She looked radiant, her engagement diamond catching the light, but her eyes were frantic as they darted toward the screen. "Before Judge Blackwood makes the official announcement," Phaedra said, her voice shrill over the jazz, "the family has a personal update. For the sake of the Brennan-Caspian legacy, Vespera will be taking an extended leave of absence to focus on her mental health. We've already authorized the clearing of the Litchfield property to remove the burden from her shoulders." I watched her lips move, counting the seconds in my head. I knew that at that exact moment, the automatic margin calls were hitting her private email. The golden couple was about to find out that their luxury was leveraged to the hilt. I stepped forward, the black binder heavy in my hand, and looked at the crowd. I didn't wait for permission. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the jazz with the precision of a scalpel, "I'd like to discuss the true price of that clearance." The room held its breath. The mirror was out, and the light was about to be turned on. The air in Stamford Superior Court, Room 4B, has a specific recycled weight to it. It smells of industrial floor wax, old paper, and the sterile hum of a heavy-duty air conditioning system. I sit at the defense table, my back straight, my hands resting lightly on the black leather binder. I am not the center of this room. I am the observer. Morwenna occupies the witness stand. She is a study in curated grief, wearing a tailored navy wool suit and a single strand of Caspian's favorite pearls. Her voice is a subtle, trembling instrument, not loud enough to be aggressive, but just fragile enough to demand sympathy. She isn't testifying. She is performing the role of a martyr. "We only wanted Vespera to be safe," Morwenna tells the judge, her eyes shimmering with a practiced moisture. "The accident, it changed her. She's been living in that ruin in Litchfield, hallucinating about secret safes and non-existent debts. We filed for the evaluation because a mother's first duty is to protect her child from herself." In the front row of the gallery, Phaedra dabs at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She whispers just loud enough for the neighboring investors to hear, It's so tragic. She was always so logical until the crash. Now she sees conspiracies in every ledger. I do not interrupt. I do not shake my head or scoff. I simply watch the dust motes drifting in the bars of sunlight. I watch the court reporter's fingers dancing over the keys. I wait until the silence in the room becomes pressurized, until even the judge begins to look uncomfortable with the length of my stillness. I watch them weave the rope. I didn't need to help. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be heavy. Balthazar Blackwood stands. He doesn't look at Morwenna. He doesn't acknowledge the suffering on her face. He looks at the judge with the eyes of a man who has already seen the autopsy report of a lie. "Your Honor?" Balthazar says, his voice a calm, tectonic rumble. "Before we discuss the ruined house, we must discuss the ruined foundation of this entire estate." He places a certified document on the bench. Proof object #4. "This is a marriage certificate from Leeds, West Yorkshire, dated June 12, 1998, Balthazar says. "Between a Morwenna Jones and a Mr. Alastair Vaughan. We have combed the records of every jurisdiction in the United Kingdom and the United States. There is no record of a divorce decree. Morwenna Caspian never legally ended her first marriage. Her union with Caspian was void ab initio, from the beginning. Under the laws of this state, she has no standing as a surviving spouse, and she never had a claim to the Caspian Group's assets." The silence that falls over room 4B is absolute. It is the sound of a vacuum being created. Morwenna's face undergoes a kinetic collapse, the color draining from her cheeks in a mottled, ugly gray. Her mouth opens, but no sound comes out. I open my black binder. I read the numbers, the atmosphere of truth that no performance can counter. "During my tenure as the unofficial auditor of this family," I say, my voice level and cutting, "I documented exactly $142,400 of my own salary paid into the personal accounts of the woman standing before you while I was being called a burden. I have the receipts. I also have the record of the $40 million margin call debt that Phaedra and Morwenna triggered 3 days ago by leveraging estate stock they had no legal right to touch." I slide a printed text message across the table toward the court clerk. "This is a message from Morwenna to the estate lawyer, sent the night I was in the ICU. It reads, 'Tell her the land is worthless swamp. If she signs the quitclaim, the audit trail dies with the house.'" The reaction is a slow-motion chain event. In the gallery, the Sterlings and the other socialites don't gasp. They simply move. They literally pull their chairs back, creating a physical gap between themselves and the woman they once toasted. Phaedra's phone pings in her lap, a notification from the bank. Her face turns the color of ash as she realizes the golden life has just been repossessed. 2 plainclothes agents enter the back of the room. They don't look at me. They walk straight to the front row and stand behind Phaedra. The smell of cold leather and metal handcuffs fills the small space. I stand for the first time. I don't look at the press or the judge. I look directly at Morwenna. "You told me to take the ruined house and not ask for more," I say. Each word is a balanced line item. "I've decided to respect your wishes. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for the money you drained from me. I'm just taking back my name. You treated my competence as a weapon to use against me, but you forgot one thing. The person who balances the books is the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. That's the boundary," I continue, my voice steady and final. "From this moment on, you are a stranger to my story." I close my black leather binder. The snap of the rings is like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. I don't wait for the judge's gavel or the agents to lead Phaedra away. I place my hand on my neck brace, feeling the hard line of the scar beneath my silk scarf, and walk toward the exit. The sound of my heels on the marble floor is the only frequency left in the room. As I pass Morwenna, I don't smirk. I don't gloat. I simply place a single printed copy of my biological mother's hidden letters on the table in front of her. "I found my inheritance under the floorboards, Morwenna," I whisper. "It wasn't gold. It was the truth that you couldn't kill." I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped out into the hallway. The air was fresh, and the last of the books had finally been closed. The air outside the Stamford Superior Court was crisp, indifferent, and surprisingly quiet. There were no cheers, no cinematic swelling of music, and no grand speeches for the cameras. My name is Vespera Caspian, and I have learned that the most profound shifts in power often happen in the spaces between words. As Balthazar and I stepped onto the sidewalk, I watched the blur of charcoal gray suits, creditors, court officers, and federal agents swirl around Morwenna and Phaedra. The Greenwich socialites who had tilted their heads in pity just an hour ago now stepped back as I passed. They created a silent, respectful path, not out of love, but out of the sudden, sharp recognition of a new sovereign. Ione Vance was waiting by the car, her face as unreadable as a closed ledger. She didn't offer a congratulatory hug. She simply opened the door and said, "It's a quiet drive back to Litchfield, Vespera. Let's keep it that way." The win didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like the first full, unobstructed breath of air after a long submersion. 3 weeks later, the Litchfield house no longer looked like a ruin. The cedar siding glowed under a fresh coat of oil, the porch was steady, and the smell of pine was no longer masked by rot. I was sitting on the swing, holding a cup of tea, when a dusty rental car pulled up the driveway. The Greenwich mansion had been sold 10 days prior to satisfy the first wave of margin calls. Morwenna stepped out of the car. Her designer scarf was frayed at the edges, and the emerald silk of her blouse looked dull in the afternoon sun. She walked up the steps, her movements heavy, and then she did something I never thought I would see. She knelt. She knelt on the very floorboards I had to pry up to find the truth. She used the word daughter, as if it were a desperate currency she could still trade. She begged for the reserve funds to avoid a fraud sentence, her voice a hollow echo of the authority she once wielded. I looked at her with the calm, clinical eyes of the auditor she had trained me to be. I felt no surge of anger, no heat of revenge, just the quiet weight of a balanced equation. "On the day the will was read, Morwenna, you net those deeds into my hand," I said. My voice was steady, hitting the air with the finality of a gavel. "You told me to take the house and not ask for more. I've decided to respect your wishes. I am not asking for an apology. I am not asking for the money you took, and I have nothing left to give you. The books are closed." I stood up and walked inside. The sound of the oak door closing was solid, muffled, and absolute. It was the sound of a ledger being balanced for the last time. Later that evening, I sat in my father's old study. I pulled out my phone, the one filled with years of seen messages, ignored pleas, and the digital wreckage of a family that only valued my utility. I didn't archive the threads. I didn't save the photos for posterity. I simply hit delete all contacts. I removed the SIM card, feeling the tiny piece of plastic between my fingers, and placed it in a small box of things that no longer belonged to my future. I spent years waiting for them to see me. I realized now that as long as I was looking for my reflection in their eyes, I would always be invisible. I didn't need their recognition to know that I was the architect who kept the foundation from crumbling. I am the one who remains. I looked out at the Litchfield pines as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows across the grass. If you are currently carrying the weight of a family that only sees your utility and never your heart, you should know that the floorboards beneath you might be hiding exactly what you need to walk away. The world didn't end when I stopped carrying them. It just finally changed direction.